This tutorial is your Explorations in Typography Assignment 1 third page showing the extra letting or space between, sort of called the same thing. And that is your paragraph indicator showing space between each of the paragraphs. So I'm going to pick up where we left off from the last video. And as a reminder, we've done indent, which is a pretty common paragraph indicator. And then we went through extent, which is not as common. And now we're going to move forward with the space between or extra letting, whichever you call it. And that's also pretty common, where you would have your typeset with an extra space in between the paragraphs. But the way we're going to set it up is not as common. And I will show you how to do that, and I'll explain why. First thing I'm going to do is go to my page 3 here, which I set up with my standard copy, which just has basic typesetting. I'm going to Command A, Command C to copy all and paste it. I'm going to go back like I did before to take page 2 and drag it right down in the plus sign so I get a new one with all of the same exact content. And again, it just makes a new page right at the very bottom, but I'm going to bring that up so it's right under page 2 because page 4 is just a dummy copy. So now I'm in my page 3 and I'm going to delete this type. This is from our extent, and move forward with a new body of copy that doesn't have any extra typesetting applied to it. So it has nothing hidden in there that I don't want. And the first thing I'm going to do is choose a new typeface. Since we're exploring, we're going to try to find a new typeface that we want to work with. And I'm going to just go right in here to find a new one. And I would definitely recommend trying to find a typeface that you enjoy working with so that you have a chance to play with the typesetting and see the difference from page to page. And I'm going to choose Rockwell. Not only do I like it, but I also find it to be a real big challenge to typeset at body copy because the slab serifs are very overwhelming and they feel very heavy. And when I look at this, I don't really feel like reading it. It feels like a little too much work. So I like to start with the challenge to show how we can make this feel a little easier to read. So I'll select all, and the first thing I'm going to do is bring it down a couple point sizes. I'm definitely going to add some tracking. For the most part, I usually work between 20 and 40, though some typefaces don't need it at all, and others might just need 10 for the sake of making it easier to fix rags like we did with the extent. But for this case, Rockwell definitely needs a little bit more. And I also think it needs a little bit more letting. So 8/11 seems pretty good. For the most part, I always work with at least that amount of added letting. So it's about 3 or 4 points over what the point size is, because I personally like to have more letting, because I personally like to read copy that has more letting. So right now, I need to fix more because this column is so wide, and from what I remember with the extent is we were having some trouble trying to fit it all in. So, and I also want to try something different. So I'm going to go into my paragraph functions, and I'm going to go over here to where the columns are, and I'm going to try 3 this time. So it's something a little different. And one other thing I could adjust right underneath it is the gutter spacing, which is this right in here in between the columns is called the gutter. And you can make it bigger or smaller. This is gigantic. That looks terrible. And too small would make it very hard to read because we would have type crashing into each other's columns. So it's important to have something nice in the middle. And I think this point 125 looks gigantic. I'm going to change that. Now that looks too small. All right, I'm going to go back to 125. And I might change that later after I fix my rags. Okay, so this feels a little better. One thing I think I'm also going to do is go ahead and bring my body copy back up to share that grid line because that's working for me overall with all these explorations. And bring that right back down to the grid line. So that saves me a lot of space, which I enjoy. To save me some more space, I'm also going to select the footer because these do not need to be this high in hierarchy. And I'm just going to knock that down a point size and then compensate by bringing it up in letting. And I think I'll just leave it at that for now. And now the other thing I have to do is get rid of all those extra spaces. So as you can see right now, this is what you are most likely used to working with when you have space between, and it is a too hard return. And I'll show you that. So if this is my line of type and I have a new paragraph, typically in the past you probably did a return and another return, and you got this space between here to indicate a new paragraph. And that is fine, but it definitely doesn't look that nice. It's a very big hole in your type. It takes up a lot of room, and it's not really needed. We don't need that much space. We're pretty smart and we can figure out where the new paragraph is with a little less space. So what we're going to do to begin with is get rid of all those spaces, just like we have done with the other tutorials. And that way we have a one hard return. And if you remember, a one hard return will allow those functions to take effect. And if we don't want it, we would push shift return, which is called a soft return. So right now I just got rid of all of those and we just have the one return. I'm going to select, actually I'm not going to select all. I have to figure out how I'm going to get the space between it. And we are going to just add 50% extra leading instead of the full 100% that a hard return would give us. So we're looking at leading, line spacing. So my leading right now is set to 11. So that means every time the line goes down, it's 11 points spaced out. And if I were to hit it twice, two returns, that would space it 22 points away, which is too big. But we found that 50% is perfect. So all I need to do is figure out what half of 11 is, which is relatively easy, and that's 5.5. So I'm going to select all and go back over here to my paragraph functions, just like we've done before, and find the space before or space after. And I emphasized or because you definitely only want to choose one. If you were to do both of them, you would essentially be adding 100%. We don't want that. So just choose one. They essentially do the same thing. I would recommend choosing one and sticking with it every time you do your space between so you can kind of get into a good habit. And this is the one I like to work in. So I'm going to select all because it defaults to inches and we want points. And so if you remember, 5.5 is 50% of my leading. So I just have to put in P 5.5. And when I hit enter, it will automatically add that 5.5 space everywhere I have a return, which is actually happening up here in my title and I don't want it. So I'm going to select that, bring it back up a line and hit shift return. So it just goes down the standard 11 points. And I also have an extra space in here that I forgot to get rid of. So I'm just going to delete that. So now I have a space between that is not too big, but definitely big enough that I can very clearly see the next paragraph. You might notice over here is still a big honking space, and I left that on purpose so that my body copy would set away from my footer would set away from my body copy. And it's also really lovely to see the difference between how big this space is and this space. So this also has the 0.50% applied as well. But you can see how much different it looks and how much better it looks with just a little bit of space. So we're not done just yet. I never added any hierarchy to my copy up here, so I think I will bump that up a little bit. I think since Rockwell does sit a little heavy, I'm going to set it at 80% gray. And I'm doing this in the color picker, not in the opacity. So that's nice. It kind of goes back a little bit. It's nicer on my eyes. And then the header is in 100% black. So that's doing a lot for hierarchy right there. It looks like things shifted a little bit with all my soft returns. So I'm just going to move my line of copy here back onto the grid line where I want it. And that's great. I, for the most part, am happy with the way my type looks, but we need to check the details. I want to get this footer to set away from the body copy even more, so I'm just going to give that a little bit more of a push to gray. And now I have some things to fix. I have some ugly rags, and I have a widow. I have another widow, so there's not a lot of good things going on. And I also have 2 lines of a paragraph right here, which is not good. Typically, you want 3 or more lines of a paragraph together. so that they belong together. So let's leave them together. And I also want to have my type baseline align on this grid here so that this header can live in this space by itself. And it will also help with hierarchy. And then this body copy lives below this grid line. So, you could do that with just returning it down, and that would work just fine. But I will show a quick way. If you go into the paragraph functions again, we have our columns over here, the space in between the gutters that we already set. And then there's this thing over here called with none, and that's span columns. And I am going to tell my header to span all the columns, all 3 of them. And that is, even though it's not actually reaching all the way over there, it's basically telling the program, no, this space is for my header. You have to live down here. So I'm happy with the way that looks. We have a nice hard edge at the top, but we have terrible rags and a widow. So now you'll remember I added tracking, and I mentioned it looks really nice to have a little space between my characters. It's also really nice to fix rags and widows. So now I think what I'm going to do to save some space is get rid of this extra space here and just let it be the space between. I made this gray and smaller, and I can do more to it if I have to, so it's setting apart like I want it to. And that's going to buy me back a little space so that I can adjust my column width. So I find adjusting the column width to be an effective way to fixing rags. And anytime you fix rags, it's nice to do that globally so that you don't have to worry about anything line by line. Good. Okay. That very first paragraph up there, second line, has a huge angle right here. And that is not what I want. This has some chunks in it too I'm not happy with, but this is a pretty bad one right here. So I definitely want to get rid of that. So I'm just going to go ahead and see what I need to do to find the best adjustment all around. And that seems to be a good width right there. I fixed that. It fixed a little bit in here, still a little bit going on here, but overall this is much better to deal with. So now I just have to get rid of my widows, and I'm going to use tracking for that. I'm going to select the whole paragraph, and I'm just going to bring this to a 20. Didn't work. I'm going to try a 40. That did work. Then I'm going to select this paragraph and do the same thing, right to a 40, so that I am not changing things too dramatically. So now we have a 30, a couple of 40s, and it goes back to 30. I think everything else is looking okay. My rags are kind of a disaster down here. Let's see if the 40 fixes it. It does, so maybe I should have just set this all to 40 to begin with. And yeah, this didn't really do a whole lot, but I'm gonna call it done. Yeah, so this is almost a mix of 30 and a 40. So, but that's all right. And I'm fine with the way everything else looks. So I am happy with this. So just a quick overview. It's already set up, but make sure you figure out what your leading is. Get half of that, so 5.5. And then you add it in here. Again, it defaults to inches, so you have to select it all and put your P 5.5. And anywhere you have one return, it will also add that extra 50%. And that's all you need, so no too hard returns. And now the only thing left to do is to update our specs. And so up here, I'll put the prompt of space between, and I will put it over here as well. There's no need to call out the 50%. We can figure it out because we have 8 over, what, now do I have 8 over, oh, okay. We have 8 over 11, and that's Rockwell, regular. So I can tell by looking at your space between that it's added 5.5. So you don't need to call that out. You need to do it though. So at times I might say check that this is correct because it might look a little big. The biggest challenge with setting space between is remembering to do this in the future. So we are going to move along to new explorations in assignment 2. And you might find that you want to mix space between and with something else. And I find it to be really common that people tend to forget how to do this. So come back and visit this tutorial if you need it again. That's all for now.